If you're tuning in today, then you know it is Random Topics Sunday on my channel, Gboot2786, Gavin Richard, as well as if you're watching on Facebook, the self-entitled page, Gavin Richard, and on Twitter, Gavin Rich2786. Joining me today is Brother Albert Lennier Jr., and we're going to be talking about the life and death of Charles Sonny Liston. Now, of course, when I've had Al come on to the channel, Al is a veteran journalist for over 25 years. Uh, Al has actually uh, been on my channel before to talk about various things, including the deaths of Sam Cooke, uh, as well as some other celebrities and artists who have died under mysterious circumstances. I had an idea to bring him back on to talk more about this, especially when I happened to, by circumstance, just watch a unsolved mystery, or I recall an unsolved mystery episode where they mentioned Charles Sonny Liston and his passing. Now, for those who don't know who Sonny Liston was, he was the former world heavyweight champion for at least less than 2 years after beating Floyd Patterson, who was then the only two-time heavyweight boxing champion of the world. And he actually beat him twice in a rematch as well. And this was before Muhammad Ali came onto the scene. So tune in right now, ladies and gentlemen, as we discuss the life and death of Charles Sonny Liston. This is Gavin Richard, where Gavin Richard presents, and let's get started. Let's see, where's the music? Welcome everyone to another edition of Gavin Richard Presents here on channel Gboot2786, Gavin Richard on Facebook and YouTube, as well as Gavin Rich2786, whoever you are, wherever you are. I hope you're blessed and good safe. We're about to get this party started, ladies and gentlemen. Give me a few seconds and we will be talking with our friend Al Lennier Jr. We're about to bring him in right now. Let me put myself on. There we go. And of course, there's Al right there. Let's get started in a second. Hello, Al. Greetings.
Hi, how are you? How are things going?
Things are doing fine. How are things in Hawaii?
Oh, in Hawaii? Well,
Yeah.
Hawaii just got ranked as the number 1 state by, I think it was a YouGov survey. I found that a little interesting.
Oh, okay.
Um, that was on a show called Rising, which is on YouTube. It's the Hill newspaper puts that show out. They did a segment on that.
Right.
I'm in a looser state of mind. I'm more relaxed because my media tour's over. So it just
Right.
ended April 5th. I did a show called Popcorn Politics where I analyzed the movie broadcast news. So I'm a lot more relaxed now, just trying to line up freelance projects, freelance gigs, and writing gigs, and because I returned to freelance writing, and I was retired for 4 years.
Right.
And I have to say, right off the bat, I really kind of have a newfound respect for actors and celebrities who have to do press and media and all these tours. Like you have the Oscars. I don't know if the Oscars are tonight or when there are, but the actors that go on these late night talk shows and since campaign, or I have a newfound respect for them because I had to do like an interview every week, and I had never done that prior to that. I've been interviewed on talk shows, podcasts, and other shows like this, or any kind of
Right.
show, for over a decade. And I had only done about 3 to 5, actually 3 to 6 interviews at most a year for the past several years. Very informal. And I had to do when I started the tour, which was February to April, just early April 5th, April 5th. I did like 4 interviews in a month, and I would never have done that. So I was on like 4 shows. It's like doing an interview a week. And so a couple of weeks I did 2 interviews. So it's been it's been an education. And right now, so I'm looser. I'm like, not that I was unhappy. I had a lot of good times. Like the show that we did on Sam Cooke, I thought was a good one, good solid show. And there were some good conversations, good shows I did on the other shows, other programs I was on. But I'm just relaxed. I'm relaxed right now. So I'm kind of taking it easy. That's one reason I decided to do this show, was talking about Sonny Liston, who I knew about mostly as a boxer. I know about his death because you mentioned Unsolved Mysteries. I saw that years ago. So I saw that segment, and that's how I found out about his death. This was years and years ago I found out about his death, which I would consider suspicious right off the bat. But just one last thing before I go on. Like I said, I've been doing shows now for the past couple months. So I'm taking it easy. I'm relaxing. And I'd like to do, some other, like I did the true crime, a number of true crime shows, like a true crime episode talking about Sam Cooke. And I was fine to talk about it, but I got a little tired. This one's interesting to me, Sonny Liston, because it's about boxing as much as anything else. But at this point, because I'm kind of a left-wing guy, I'd love to be on like lefty shows on YouTube as well. Now that I look at it, there's some shows I'd love to do, like The Vanguard that I've been seeing. That's a show I'd love to do. And this guy called DM Brown, his show I'd love to do. And another guy called Jimmy Dore, who I've been looking at for a couple of years. I'd love to be a guest on those shows. And I could do like late night talk shows in my sleep. Every time I do a show like this or other shows, I feel like the grad student I wasn't. You know what I mean? I only got a bachelor's degree, so I didn't go to grad school. I know you went to law school, right? What law school did you go to?
Southern University Law Center.
Sorry?
Southern University Law Center.
Oh, yeah. Is that in Texas?
No, it's in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Oh, it's in Louisiana, Southern University. Oh, okay. I heard about that recently, that school recently. I never heard of it before, but I went to Southern University. Okay, in Louisiana. So, yeah, right now I'm like, relaxed. And Go ahead. Sorry.
I said, yeah, I don't know if it was it football related because Southern University just won the Bayou Classic that uh this past yesterday, actually. I was wondering if
Okay.
that's what you heard in the news recently.
No, I'd heard the name raised before. I didn't know where it was. I thought it was,
Yeah.
but
Well,
yeah, right now I'm like, so it's, I'm just trying to line up writing work because I've come out of retirement and looking to do some other shows because I've been doing I did a lot of true crime as part of the tour. So right now I'm looking to do, movie oriented stuff because I used to be a film reviewer, but looking to get on some of these left wing shows, these shows like The Vanguard and Jimmy Dore. Love to do those shows. And this DM Brown guy, love to do that. So
yeah.
that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Sorry for the plugs there, but I just
Okay.
letting you know where I'm at before I go.
Had you
That's
ever
how I'm
been?
relaxed. I'm just like, I don't have to rush to talk about stuff. It was like when I was on shows during the tour, I was like, okay, we got to get to it,
Right. Everybody was trying to get to
I want to get to the, whatever. So,
That's all right. Yeah.
before we begin, or as we begin, I should say, I wanted to know, you had requested talking about Sonny Liston. What got you interested in discussing Sonny Liston?
Well, I wanted to do basically a true crimes mystery like we did last time when we talked about Sam Cooke and we talked about the other two gentlemen whose names escape me right now with their deaths and and the mysterious circumstances that surrounded that. And I realized that there are a lot of celebrities or athletes who have died under mysterious circumstances. As Brother Ron has been quoting another individual gentleman who was Isaac Hayes's teacher. Nobody in show business dies a natural death. And
Ah,
I remember,
yes.
and I
Ron
remember,
heard of We All Be TV. I
oh,
did a show. I've done his show 3 times.
right.
Very knowledgeable guy.
He is a walking encyclopedia. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
Ron
I
personally.
know. It's impressive. He's one of the
Yeah,
more impressive hosts of shows I've done. I
right. I
rarely
think
come
I was the
across
one that
hosts
linked
who
you
are that
all.
encyclopedic.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
because
Sorry.
you wanted to be on his show, so I was the one. Yeah, I remembered and linked you guys up because Ron is good, is a good brother. He's actually, yeah, very informative about stuff. And I realized as we were talking, because we talked about unsolved mysteries, I remembered that Sonny Liston's death was actually featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries
That's
some years
correct.
back.
That's the
And
first time that I found out about it.
yes, and for those who don't know, just a little bit about Sonny Liston, and I know you don't know too much. You've already said, Al, you don't know too much about his death, but maybe if you can school people.
Well, I knew about the death, but in preparing for the show, I went into more detail. So
Okay,
it's just the way it is. I mean, when I do shows, it's since I first started getting interviewed in 2009, I'm used to doing research on
sure.
anything that I talk about. So it's old hat. And as a journalist, I was a journalist for 22 years, and I'm maybe coming back to that. I'm certainly coming back to freelance writing. But as a journalist, you're used to doing a certain amount of research for articles that you write. So it's old hat for me. I'm just used to it. So I did do research, more research. I knew the basic aspects of his death, Sonny's death. And I looked into more aspects of his death. Actually, I think a few years ago, I had read a book by Sean Assail. I think it was called The Murder of Sonny Liston. I think Sean Assail is a guy who writes for or has written for ESPN. Maybe the website, ESPN website.
Honest. Yeah, I'll put that in here. Yeah, it's available. 321 page book. It's available on Google, you guys, and it's published in 2016. Sean Assail, actually, and another thing I did too, I did my research before coming on. There was a documentary a couple of years ago too on Showtime called The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston, entitled Pariah.
Right.
And Sonny Liston was tied or had ties with, well, he did have ties with the underworld, criminal underworld, with mafia bosses and so forth, people who actually recruited him from out of prison when he was in St. Louis prison
Right.
as a teenager. And as a young man, they recruited him out of, jail and took
Mhm.
him on. And you learn, and I'm from learning from the documentary about how fights got fixed, who was a fixer, how the mob was involved, men like Frank Gapparo. I have these names written down, and we'll go over it next. Yeah, we'll go over it. Uh,
The boxing industry was heavily mob, not merely mob influenced, but mob controlled for the most part for a number of decades.
mm-hmm. Is it
And
still controlled?
well, some may argue against that, but
Only tell by
and
the decisions these judges have been making in fights I've seen.
but yeah, when you look at the story of Sonny Liston, you not only his particular story as a person, but his story as a boxer. You cannot separate the mob from this story, from not only Liston as a person, but Liston as a boxer. They're intertwined. So that's what people need to know when we look into this. So if you don't mind, I'd actually like to start with Liston's death and then work into his life. Does that work for you?
Well, that's fine, but let me do this first. I want to play
Okay.
an introductory video. I
Sure.
don't know where this documentary comes from in particular, but this is something I saw recently that I thought we could share for today's broadcast.
Hmm.
Exactly where this comes from, I think you got, I don't know exactly the title of it. It looks to be dated, has to be in the 90s when this was made, but it's an 8 minute clip from a documentary, and I'll put it up here. It's
Hmm.
called former heavyweight champion Sonny Liston is found dead by his wife Geraldine. So let's look at it. And court for it, and I went to the few steps up, and it was a terrible smell. So I went in and I said, ooh, I said, he must have cooked it and left something on the stove. So I went in the kitchen, I didn't see anything. So I went a few more of the steps up to the bedroom, and I seen him laying to his side. I said, I think Sonny's dead. He has nothing on but a t-shirt, and his head is back on the bed and canted to one side, and there's blood coming out of his nostrils and some kind of foam. And she realized he's dead, and she screams, Sonny's dead. What happens after this is kind of murky. I called my attorney and told him that Sonny was dead. He said, how you know he's dead? I said, well, he's laying, I can see he's swelled up. So he said, well, lock up and don't say anything. I think Geraldine is under the impression that a phone call was made to the authorities shortly thereafter, like 15 minutes. He said, call your doctor and call the police, and that's what it did, like in 15, 20 minutes. But in fact, a large amount of time passed, something closer to 2 or 3 hours before the authorities were called. It's a mystery to me, too. I don't know. I'm telling you, the police was right there in about 5 to 10 minutes.
Sonny Liston, the former heavyweight boxing champion, was found dead last night in his Las Vegas home by his wife. He was 38. He had been dead for at least a week. An autopsy failed to show the cause of death, and further studies will be made. Police said that they found small quantities of what appeared to be heroin and marijuana in the home.
We came upstairs, and on entering the bedroom, I observed the body of a black male adult, obviously been deceased some time, laying on his back, looking at the ceiling. In terrible shape. I was directed to the kitchen area by the investigating officers, and in this area they had located some narcotic paraphernalia, a small bag of grass, a small balloon of heroin.
So it appeared to us at that point that he got a overdose of drugs, whether it was by shooting up too much in a short time period or whatever.
There was far too many hours passed between the time that Mrs. Liston entered the house and found the body and when the actual call was made to our department. Time to remove things, to change things. Where was the surgical tubing that he would have probably used to wrap around his arm to expose a vein. Where was the spoon used for cooking? Had it been moved? None of this stuff was present. And of course, you know, the lack of things can be as suspicious as actual items of evidence there.
It wasn't uncommon for family members in these cases to go through and tidy up, so to speak, the crime scene or the scene to save face, to save family embarrassment.
At the autopsy, Dr. Clark pointed out to Mr. Carroll some scars on the arms of Sonny Liston, which at that time were interpreted as needle marks.
We spent at least all day working with this. He screened out the presence of many drugs and found he found heroin present.
The cause of death being an accidental overdose, that could very well be, but was it self-inflicted or was it administered by someone else?
There's all kinds of speculation. The kindest speculation is that Sonny had got into shooting up heroin, maybe a little joy popping or something like that, and had taken a little bit too much in his heart.
Yes, Rosalind said
People say,
hours.
well, he couldn't have done drugs. He was afraid of needles. Other people say, oh, no, he was a drug addict.
He had a dentist, and the dentist was quoted in various columns that Sonny, you know, the big bad Sonny Liston, was deathly afraid of needles.
He didn't even like to get shot. That was the only thing, you know. And so I says, I don't think that he would let someone put something to go through his veins.
One coroner at the autopsy said that he saw old needle tracks on Sonny's arm. If in fact he had old needle tracks in his arm, then that destroys the argument that Sonny could not have been a heroin addict because he was deathly afraid of needles.
The other school of thought is that Sonny was given the hot shot, an intentional overdose of heroin to kill him. Why? Well, there are some people saying that he was getting too big for his britches. He was trying to muscle in on some of the underground characters he was working for, getting too big for his britches, and they decided that this was the way to dispose of Sonny.
Harold Conrad, his old friend from the fight days, says that he had gotten involved muscling in on somebody's loan sharking business and that he was murdered over this dispute, over territory, loan sharking territory. Others say that he had had a dispute with a fight promoter out there named Ash Resnick, and that Resnick had a contract taken out of him, and the contract was executed by a colleague.
The story was that Sonny was going around Vegas shooting off his mouth, claiming that Resnick had fixed either one or both of his fights with Ali. And because of this, Resnick had supposedly taken out a contract on Sonny, who was then killed by a hotshot, an overdose of heroin. In spite of the drugs found in Liston's body and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death, the coroner still listed his death as resulting from natural causes. As a result, the police just dropped the case. There was no further investigation.
The funeral procession went down the strip, and people came out of the casinos to pay homage to Sonny Liston. The ironic thing about it was that Sonny, to the end, had a police escort, even down the strip. I thought that was the perfect touch. He had a police escort in St. Louis. He had a police escort in Philadelphia. He had a police escort in Denver. And he ended up with a police escort in Las Vegas.
The tragedy of Liston as a man was that I don't think he was ever understood by the public that he was dealing with. And he never knew how to make that public understand him.
I know all the bad things that Sonny did, or at least enough of them, you know, and I can't make excuses for a lot of the stuff that he did. But I think Sonny Liston had so many light years to come.
Many times I was around with Sonny Liston, he said, "You like me, don't you?" Like a little kid would, you know. is to share a lot of things. You know, I like you too. I think because of his terrible background growing up, he was looking for somebody who didn't criticize him and who didn't want to hit him with a club or a stick.
Sonny brought a lot of this stuff on himself. There's no question about it. There is nonetheless an undercurrent of sadness about Sonny Liston, and I feel it for him because he was born without a chance. On some level of his life, he was a stranger to everybody who knew him in a way, because he was one guy to one person and one guy to another. Nobody knows exactly when he was born, and very appropriately, nobody knows exactly the day he died. Here's a man who didn't know himself, and I don't know if anybody else really knew the whole Sonny Liston either.
All right, so don't know where that documentary came from, where it was. I just was sharing that for purposes of education, and it's copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, unfair use doctrine. So that's why I shared it. But interestingly enough about Sonny Liston, well, here's the thing, Ross, because you said he was only 38. Nobody knows exactly how old Sonny Liston was. I've seen records. If you look on Wikipedia, say 1930. His headstone reads 1932. And Sonny apparently, he died basically the same way he was born, as what it says. Nobody knows when he died exactly, and nobody knows the date he was born. So it's a very tragic life. And he was a very controversial figure nonetheless, but a lot of people still speculate, did he have to die the way he did, and under the circumstances of what happened. So Val, you wanted to talk about, let's getting into his death. In that clip, we got details about his death, some things that jumped out to me, but
Right.
why don't you take at it?
That was kind of a good setup to discussing Sonny's death, because you get an idea of what the people out there, and I'm curious, I'll probably look at the chat later, I can't look at it now, but I'm curious as to how many people here watching this are actual fight fans or boxing aficionados or into boxing. I'm curious about that, because when you talk about Sonny Liston, you have to discuss boxing. Now, when I was doing research for this show and doing this interview, I ended up watching far more boxing footage than I intended.
Mm-hmm.
Largely the two Ali fights, which I'll get to later, I hope. 1964 and then 1965.
Talking about it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so when we look at those of you who are so that's what I will say. I'm just curious as to the people out there, whether there are any real boxing aficionados or fans, just my curiosity. That having been said, we discussed the death of Sonny Liston, and you just saw an idea. Sorry?
I think we have a delay when we're talking, but I was saying we have a few boxing aficionados and sports fans here. I see my cousin Dwayne is present in the chat. What's up, Dwayne? He's watching on Facebook. I don't know about Rosalind or anyone else, but the viewers will come in and out. And some people too, we have some younger people, they may not know who Sonny Liston was. So
right.
Yeah.
I'm just asking out of curiosity, because this is about boxing, and it just seems right in the sports mad society to talk about, just to mention that. Now,
okay.
Now, I used to follow boxing. I'm not an expert on boxing. I just to state my bona fides here. I did follow it years ago. And my interest is largely more in terms of sports history. So I find the history. And that's why I've read, in terms of my background in regards to Sonny Liston, I read at least a couple of books on Liston. I think Nick Tosh's book years ago about him. And I think I read Shauna Sale's book on the murder of Sonny Liston. Shauna Sale was a ESPN writer, I believe, ESPN site writer. And so my knowledge of Liston is largely that as a boxer. And I found out about the death, as you mentioned, unsolved mysteries. And so when we saw that the snippet from the documentary, I believe it was an HBO documentary that you showed about Liston.
Yeah.
What that sets up is it gives you an idea of the views that Shauna Sale's book.
That's Shauna
What
Sale.
that documentary footage that you saw sets up some of the viewpoints, such as Geraldine Liston, who was Sonny's wife, her accounting for what happened. And some other sports writers that are interviewed there. And you also had a couple of the cops. One was, I think, Dennis Caputo, who was a sergeant with, Las Vegas Police Department. He was one of the officers on the scene. And I think Gary Beckwith is another one. I think Sale had interviewed Beckwith, if I'm not mistaken, in his book on the death of Sonny Liston. Primarily, so you have an idea of the basic scope. And so let me just go over a few things, since you guys now watching this have an idea of the basic scope. Now, basically, Geraldine, who was, as I mentioned before, Sonny's wife, she was actually on vacation in St. Louis, Missouri. And she was, I believe, visiting her mother, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Geraldine has stated that she came back to Vegas. I think she had been in St. Louis for at least a week, if not a couple of
days. Right.
And
she had left him to go to her family's, to go see some relatives, I guess her mother and so forth.
Right. Her mother and I think some relatives.
After New Year's. Right.
So she came back. She had stated in the accounts that I've read and what I've seen, not only the documentary you just showed or the footage of the documentary you showed, which I saw as part of my research, but other videos and documentaries I've seen in research for this. She stated that she couldn't reach Sonny by phone. She couldn't get in contact with him. So she decided to come back to Vegas. Now, to give you an idea of the kind of surroundings, so she came back to where they lived, which was in a suburb called Paradise Palms. In generally, and I have to state this, which was generally I like to use the term European American instead of white, but European American neighborhood, a Caucasian neighborhood. I say that because Vegas, back in January of 1971, which is when Sonny was found dead, Las Vegas was a very, very segregated city.
Yeah.
Primarily, the demarcations were, I believe, the west side and the east side. Right. And the west side was the African American side. And my understanding is that, without going into detail too much right now, that Sonny spent a good amount of time on the west side after he had moved to Las Vegas and when he was in Vegas. And so they lived in a suburb, like I had mentioned, a suburb called Paradise Palms. I think specifically it was 2058 Ottawa Drive, which is where their home was. So Geraldine came back to Paradise Palms, the suburb. And what she noted ostensibly from the accounts that I have perused and read was that there were papers piled up, newspapers piled up, and milk bottles, which had gone, that were still there, had gone unopened. They weren't used. So, you had that. So that was suspicious. She had gone into the house. And from what I understand, she had noticed, and obviously her nose detected a very foul, extremely I guess what eventually was a horrible smell. And she has stated that she thought Sonny was cooking something, and it had, I guess, burnt or gone wrong. But that was her assessment at first. That's what she had stated. She looked in the kitchen, there's no one in the kitchen, nothing in the kitchen. And then went up to, I guess, the bedroom on the second floor, the upstairs bedroom or master bedroom. And there she found Sonny in bed. Now, by this time, Sonny was bloated. I believe putrefaction had obviously set in, meaning that his organs had already failed, and it was creating, as with any dead body, what it creates is a stench, on
methane gas,
unbearable odor. Right. Go ahead.
But I'm saying, yeah, the smell of methane gas. Basically, the body was past rigor mortis and started to decompose. So he had been dead for a couple of days.
Yeah, the speculation that I don't know if it's speculation, but I think the estimation is anywhere from 5 to 6 days. So it could have been a week, but I've heard 5 days, I've heard 6 days. So I put it 5 to 6 days, so nearly a week. And again, that's an estimate. As you noted, and as the documentary footage we saw noted, no one knew precisely when Sonny Liston died. There wasn't a precise date. There was only the date, which was in January of 1971, where he was found in the house. So that we know he was found in the house in January of 1971. We don't know precisely when he had died. Now, what was found in the house? Now, here's where things get a little suspicious, if not very suspicious. Geraldine, as those who saw the footage played here can attest to, Geraldine has said she called the cops. But the reality was, from what I've read, that supposedly she'd called her lawyer first.
Right. And that was in the documentary.
Right. And then from what I understand, also a doctor. In any event, there were at least a couple of hours that had passed since Geraldine found Sonny's body in the master bedroom. And so the cops were clearly not called right away.
Right.
I think it's safe to say
remember is from a documentary I saw, the other documentary, Pariah. They actually state that she went to a next door neighbor, and actually they came over as well. And what is speculated, I guess you'll get to it, is maybe they did some cleaning up. I don't know exactly, but at either event, the police say they weren't called. If she got home at 11:30 at night or 11 o'clock at night, the cops didn't arrive until that morning. So
yeah, they arrived at about midnight, at least, either midnight or just after midnight. The reality is that I'm just going to come out and say it right now. I find Geraldine's account highly suspicious. Nothing against the lady, but I find her account very suspicious and her action suspicious. In fact, I'm just going to come out and say it right now. I believe she knew that Sonny was dead. When I say that, I don't mean when she came up, as people saw in the documentary footage, that she said, "Oh, Sonny's dead." I believe she knew before she arrived at the home that Sonny was likely dead. I believe that's why she came back to Las Vegas.
Well, let me ask you this. You think she was tipped off? So you think she was tipped about it? You think she knew about it was going to happen in advance before she left?
I think she knew. I think that's why she left Vegas in the first place. I think that's why she left Vegas in the first place and visited her family. And she came back, because if you look at her story, you look at, and again, you hear some of that in the documentary, but if you look at her story, there are things that strike. I mean, you saw it in the documentary footage. She comes up there and she looks at him and says, "Oh, Sonny's dead." It's a rather quick assessment. Sounds rather matter of fact. Now, again, she's recounting this for this documentary, so years have gone by, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that right away struck me as suspicious. Her tone and the way she described it. Secondly, that she came to the home, saw the newspapers there, saw the milk bottle there, actually saw lights on, and then came in. And her story about Sonny cooking and food and all that, I don't buy that. It's a nice little excuse, but I think it's a nice detail that's thrown in.
And I would think you would know the difference between burnt food and a decomposing body.
Precisely. Yeah, right. Like
completely different odor than something cooking on a stove. If you smell something burning, you'll smell something burning.
Right.
Yeah, but
and
in fairness, I think just knowing that if you saw somebody bloated, swollen, and decomposing, you would know. I guess that means they're dead. They're not responding. So I mean, he was already decomposing. So
right, but so that's understandable that you saw him bloated, that you saw him in his state, because Sonny at the time, I believe, was wearing like a t-shirt and some
boxers,
shorts, I think. Yeah, boxer shorts and a t-shirt. And he was there in the bed. Again, putrefaction had set in, which accounted for the smell. Decomp was already underway, and he was clearly, gases had filled him up, and his organs were failing, and he was bloated. But my point is, the way she described it, the way she talked about it, strikes me as very detached, very matter of fact, as if somebody who right off the bat knew, oh, he's dead. That's why I'm very suspicious of Geraldine. I don't believe she is innocent in regards to the death of Sonny Liston. I think she knew that Sonny was dead before she arrived at the house. I think she knew. And I think the reason she came back was to take care of business there. Because you have to look at the lag between when she reported coming in to discover his body and when she actually called the cops and the cops came. It was at least a couple hours. Now, what was found in the home was ostensibly a bit of marijuana and I believe some vodka, which was near Sonny. In the kitchen was ostensibly a baggie or balloon, as it's known, of heroin. Not huge, copious amounts, but some degree of heroin, right? So you have drugs found. Now, what was odd about the kitchen is the fact that you had this baggie, this balloon of heroin, but there was no needle. There was no rubber hose, which I understand that addicts use to like tie to shoot themselves up.
Like a tourniquet. Yeah.
No spoon. My understanding of heroin is you use a spoon. Again, I don't pretend to be an expert when it comes to illegal drugs. Go ahead.
I said you don't have no experience with that. Neither do I.
No. I mean, there's what I've read, in regards to the drug wars, for example, and my knowledge of it, a certain amount of knowledge. Now, I cite those aspects because I cite the needle especially because, as you heard in the documentary footage, Geraldine had stated that Sonny didn't like needles. Others had stated that he didn't like needles. In fact, Johnny Taco, who was the trainer of Sonny Liston, I think he had told the Washington Post or some newspaper that Liston was afraid of really afraid of needles. That he wouldn't even go to doctors to get shots and so forth because he just didn't want needles in his body. My understanding of a drug like heroin is you need needles in order to use it for the most part. Now, again, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is you need needles. So if there were no needles found in the kitchen, or I assume anywhere else in the home, no spoon, no hosing, rubber hosing, right away, that's kind of suspicious detail number 2. The first detail that was suspicious was Geraldine's assessment and her actions. The second is the lack of a needle, lack of tubing, and lack of a spoon or anything else. It was just this bag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the picture up here is Sean. It's an article by Sean Assail, who wrote the book The Murder of Sonny Liston.
Right.
So I think it's an excerpt from the book, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about that, but I think it's an excerpt.
I don't know what this is from 2016 in October. Might be, but it says here, this is a picture of Sonny Liston. Obviously, I think that picture is from his first fight with Muhammad Ali, who was then Cassius Clay. And that's when he infamously quit on his stool. And, this article, it was written by Sean Assail, where he talks about in 1982 when when a sergeant for the Las Vegas Police Department got a strange tip that set in motion a new round of questions. So I haven't asked what that was yet, but of course, I guess you can finish what you were saying right there, Al.
So, like I said, you had what I call the interesting, is it the odd or interesting detail number 1? I'll call it odd detail number 1, which was Geraldine's assessment in the documentary and her behavior, her actions. Then you had the odd detail number 2, which was the fact that you found it was a baggie or bag of heroin, some degree of heroin, found in the kitchen, which was otherwise, from what I understand, spotless, but no tubing, no needle was found, no other accoutrement, or other instruments used in shooting up heroin were found in that kitchen, or I believe anywhere in the home, though I can't guarantee that, but I don't think they found. Certainly, I think Dennis Caputo had noted, the sergeant from the Las Vegas Police Department who was on the scene, had noted there were no weapons found, and there were no, I guess, wounds in particular found on Liston. So, so you have those 2 details right there that I just mentioned, odd details. And so he was transported, and so Liston was transported. The autopsy by the coroner of Clark County, which Las Vegas is in, had noted that, or came to the conclusion that he died generally of natural causes. And that there were, I think the specifics were heart failure, generally a heart attack or heart failure, and congestion in the lungs. It is noted that there were some drugs in Sonny Liston's system, in his body, specifically codeine and morphine, and I think heroin in general. But the problem was that the drugs, I think in general, at least heroin in general, were not enough to kill him with an overdose. In other words, they weren't enough they weren't built up enough in order to create an overdose, to overdose and thus kill him by overdose.
Hold on a second, Al, because I'm getting comments that's saying that the mic is low. I'm trying to see if they're talking about my microphone. Can you hear me? You can hear me good, can't you?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. I'll louden it up a little bit just in case. All right, but yeah, go ahead. I apologize. Go ahead, Al.
No, I understand. I understand. Like I mentioned, in the autopsy that was conducted, like I'll repeat again, codeine and morphine were found, and I think there was heroin as well in general, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't built up enough in the body in order to cause a fatal collateral damage or fatal damage, which would be an overdose. So this is, again, another interesting or odd detail. Number 3, I would say, you have drugs in the system, but not enough to create an overdose. And of course, on the autopsy, it's ruled that he died of a natural causes. Natural cause being lung congestion and a heart attack or heart failure. Now, you could argue that having those drugs in the system wouldn't necessarily. I'm not a medical examiner or a medical expert, but
well,
they don't seem like a natural cause to me. But go ahead. Sorry.
Main thing for me too. When I look at the autopsy report, well, first off, they couldn't conduct an autopsy because his organs were so decomposed and so forth. So for me, it's hard how when they do a preliminary, when they do an examination of the body and they could see the needle marks and so forth. The question is, how much could they have seen? Because if the body is already decomposed or has started decomposition, it's been over a week now. It loses its, the skin obviously would be discolored. It's bloated, so it's losing its touch. We don't know exactly for sure if you could have seen needle marks. But of course, this is something that never went to trial. We don't know much about it. It's a mystery. There's a mystery on that, almost similar to what happened, with Sam Cooke. But yeah, although I know Sam's body wasn't as decomposed as Sonny Liston's when he was initially found. But yeah, and what you're saying is true. The toxicology report also, while it detected heroin and some drugs in his system, I know, for instance, like marijuana can be in your system for even over 3 months. If it still has those traces of chemicals. So who knows how long ago that was.
Right. Well, again, you bring out a salient point, which was that there was no real murder investigation conducted in regards to Liston because it wasn't considered a homicide that I'm aware of. If he died of natural causes, you don't have a homicide ruling. I don't think he was ruled a homicide by a coroner. So you didn't have a homicide investigation. And so thus there was no suspect. There's no formal suspect that I'm aware of. I mean, you have Sean Assail's book, which you can see right up there. And he's looked into possible, he's looked into possible
ties to the police department.
I don't want to associate, but possible areas of where kinds of individuals or kinds of personages that could have killed or had Sonny Liston killed.
Yeah, he has looked into, and in this book and even an excerpt, he actually names a Las Vegas undercover detective by the name of Gandy. He was, his name is Larry Gandy, and this was also in the documentary that we saw, Pariah, the lives and deaths of Sonny Liston, where an informant wanted to give up this police detective, saying that he delivered a hot shot, what they call a hot ball, similar to what happened with John Belushi and his death to Sonny Liston, killing him. Now, that's one.
I don't want to, before you go on, you mentioned Belushi. and I don't want to go too far into that, but I've always been suspicious about the death of John Belushi. I never believed that it was an outright overdose. No disrespect to his family or his friends, but I do believe John Belushi was killed. I believe he was murdered. I don't want to go into detail about that, but so when you mention the hot shot in that aspect, yeah, I can see the correlation there. Go ahead and continue. Sorry to digress.
All right, no problem. Yeah, well, the other thing too, and let me stop this, but I'll put the link in the description so everybody can go take a look at it. But there are several people that are, and we'll talk about in a second, who are tied to Sonny Liston. You know, I mentioned the mob earlier. One of the fight fixers, Ben, who fixed fights in a couple people. That one person named in that documentary was a guy named Ash Resnick or Riddick,
right?
If I'm not mistaken. And
well, he was
Ash Resnick, and he was tied to, he was Sonny Liston's, I guess, his manager, and he actually was tied to, supposedly tied with the mafia. Also, when Sonny Liston came out, there were guys, gentlemen by the name of mafia figure out in Philadelphia. I have his name, Frank. Had it written down here. Where the hell is it? It's not pulling up. Okay, hold on. Give me 1 second. Frank Palermo and
Blinky Palermo. Yeah, that was his early manager. Yeah. When Liston, Blinky Palermo was an early manager. He was supposedly tied to a guy called Frankie Carbo, who was like a hitman.
That was another one, Frankie Carbo and Frank Palermo. And Frank Palermo, Blinky Palermo, he actually set up the infamous Jake LaMotta, Billy Fox fight, which if that's shown in Raging Bull when LaMotta is basically not fighting back and he's crying uncontrollably in the locker room and so forth. Yeah, famous scene. But he was tied to Sonny Liston as well. Another gentleman too. Let me put a picture of this guy up. His name is Red Rodney. Now, this is, let's see, I have it right here. Red Rodney was a trumpeter with Charlie Bird Parker. Now, he's important in this as well because he became friends with Sonny Liston, and supposedly he, from watching even the Pariah documentary, you can watch it on Showtime on demand, it's free. He made, they were all involved with heroin and so forth, those guys and drugs. And supposedly his own son even said that his dad told him that Sonny's days were numbered. Don't go by him. They were having a fallout. Sonny Liston, even a few months before he died, went over to Rodney's home. And according to his son, went through some things at his dad's house where could hear things being moving around. So they were estranged. Ash Rednick, they also were estranged from Sonny Liston. And another gentleman, so that's Red Rodney. He's deceased now. Another gentleman that you could look into, should look into, is a guy named Earl Gage. Earl Gage was a drug dealer out in Las Vegas.
But he was a beautician who was Earl Gage was a beautician that was, from what I understand, but he was selling drugs on the side. So he was also a drug dealer.
He was a drug dealer. Yeah, that's what's said. He was a drug dealer. And Gage, one night in 1969, there was a sting operation at Gage's home. And Gage gets arrested. Sonny Liston is in the house with him. And the feds, it was a federal stick-up, a fed sting, But then the Las Vegas Police Department came in as well, saw Sonny Liston, and pulled Sonny out. They didn't arrest him along with Gage, which is what most people think that Gage, and I guess in Gage's mind was that Sonny Liston ratted him out. And supposedly, they list him even as a suspect because they say he was a killer. And Sonny Liston probably likely was killed by him. But others have said it was about, and speaking of mafia, one of Sonny Liston's or his final fight was a fight with a guy by the name of Chuck Wepner, who would go on to fight Muhammad Ali in 1975 for the world title and lose. And famously enough, that was the fight that inspired Sylvester Stallone to write Rocky. Just a little just something for everybody to know, a little trivia.
Chuck Wepner, the Bayonne bleeder, as he was known. And the scuttlebutt in regards to Liston was that, if you believe the scuttlebutt, which was that he was supposed to lose that fight. He was supposed to take a dive, as the expression goes, and didn't. He beat Wepner. So that's another suspicious element or suspicious aspect. As people can tell at this point, there are a number of possible theories and elements and sort of digressions and progression, a sort of roads in regards to speculating and examining who, if you believe that Sonny Liston was murdered, who may have murdered him. Now, first of all, you have to believe that Sonny Liston was murdered. There are those who believe that he wasn't, that he simply died of a drug overdose, even though technically he didn't. It wasn't, the drugs supposedly in his system weren't strong enough to create an overdose. But there are those who believe in general he died of basically heart failure, congested lungs related to drugs. And that it may have been even suicide. So first of all, when you deal with Liston, you have to make a decision as to, if you're going to examine his death, you make a decision as to what you think the outcome was. What do you think happened? In my assessment, I believe there are only two possible outcomes. I believe that that Sonny Liston died either accidentally or that he was murdered. It's only those two. And generally, I think that he was murdered, that he was killed.
Yeah,
that's.
I think so too. And it could very well be all of the above that were involved in some way, because it's like the mafia, of course. This is the 1970s in Las Vegas. This was the height of Tony Spilotro, and the mafia, of course, still ran Las Vegas at that point, especially the Chicago outfit. And I think they had contacts within the Las Vegas police. I'm pretty sure they had contacts in the Las Vegas Police Department and the county sheriff's office where they could have used their tactics, used their influence to get to Sonny Liston. And my thinking is, I don't know Geraldine. I guess she's no longer with us because I haven't heard anything from her in a long time. I don't know if she's still alive or what. I think she's deceased, but her story sounds suspicious, and or her accounts are certainly suspicious. I think that the Reddick guy is suspicious, as well as the other gentleman, the Red Rodney, as well, and this Earl Cage. My whole thing is that there was no signs of a forced entry. So my thing is that this might have been somebody that Sonny knew. He lets them in the apartment, into the house, and I guess at some point or another, I don't know if they knocked him out cold from behind. There's no signs of a struggle. Obviously, Sonny Liston was only, I think from what I'm looking at, he was only about 6'1". But I mean, we know if you're fighting a boxer or trying to knock somebody, a guy like that, you got to do it when he's not looking. Because I'm pretty sure he would have fought off those guys, could have fought off those guys unless they had guns.
That's a good point. I agree with you in that it probably was someone that he knew, because I believe that it was open. The house, the lights were on, you know, and the door, I believe, was open. I believe it was open. Or the door was not locked. So I believe it was open. So it's more than likely that someone who knew Liston was involved with his death. Whether they actually did the deed, if you believe that Liston was murdered, I don't think so. I think that whoever knew Liston or knew him well enough to go in there came with someone else. It's likely there was more than one person involved. I would have a hard time believing this was one person if he was murdered, which I believe he was. I don't think it was one person that did it. I think it was more than one person. So it was at least a two-person job.
Had to have
two men.
And because somebody would have to, one person could body up like that. Yeah.
And you also have to look at the means of death. So this was clearly drugs in the system, heroin to an extent, but also other drugs. Now, people point to a possible mob hit in regards to Liston, but this isn't normally how the mob functioned. Certainly not in the 60s, or even this was early 70s. So some have argued that maybe the mob was turning to other methods of dispatching people. But right off the bat, I would be suspicious that this was a pure mob hit. At that point, you know, he had basically, Liston had lost, although he had beat Wetner, he had lost to Leotis Martin, who was his former sparring partner. And Martin had knocked him down. And that pretty much wiped and knocked him down. Right. And knocked out any chance he had at regaining a title shot. Because he had won something like 14 matches since his defeat to Ali, his second defeat to Ali in 1965. Won something like 14 matches in a row. But his title shot chances were pretty much diminished, if not dashed. And so I wonder why. I mean, it's feasible that the mafia and the mob might have thought, well, we have no use for Liston at this time, but I don't really see it as clear as that, because it was well known that throughout Liston's career that he had ties to and was involved with mob figures and mob members. This wasn't a secret. This wasn't like it was something that just came out after he died. It was known at the time. It was known in terms of investigations of organized crime that you had that his control, that his contract was controlled by individuals who were either involved in the mob or tied to mob leaders or mob members. So I'm always wary when you look at Liston's death. I'm wary that the mob was the deciding if he was murdered, which I believe he was. I don't really think the mob was behind it. I don't think they were.
Well, let me ask you this then, because even in the movie Casino, when Sam Ace Rothstein's wife, and I know it's based off of, he's inspired, his character was based off of Lefty Rosenthal. Didn't his wife die under the same circumstance as far as drug overdose? And he speculated that, or it was speculated she was killed with that.
It's possible. You know, I mean, like I said, it's possible that the mob could have been involved. I you know, again, you have to, in the case of Liston, in order for them to act on it, you have to, my understanding of organized crime is they don't do things for illogical reasons. They do them for logical reasons. And that includes deaths. That's not taken lightly. It's, there's a certain gravity that's connected to it, especially in a time, especially during that time, you're talking the 60s, and then you get into early 70s, when you, of course, had, over the years, you had more FBI, not only surveillance of mob figures, but also efforts to try to bring them down in some respects. It's my understanding of organized crime, not being an expert in the area, but my understanding of them is they don't take these things lightly. They don't take deaths lightly. So it's possible, it's feasible. It's not the general way that the mob eliminated people. It's generally by, by guns, shooting someone and leaving either the body somewhere or hiding the body somewhere. But yeah, again, it's feasible that the mob could have been involved. But at this time, I'm looking 1971. Liston isn't a valuable. I mean, his career is pretty much in the dump.
Yeah, that's true.
And the scuttlebutt was that he was involved. Like I said, the West Side. That Liston would go over to the West Side, go and drink and hang out, which was West Side was African American, because the Las Vegas, as I mentioned, was very segregated, extremely segregated, even in early 70s. In fact, Liston and his wife Geraldine were unusual in living in that suburb because it was largely, like I said, Caucasian suburb. It was on that side of town. So when you look at his actions, my understanding is that, according to what's reported, that he would go off for a couple days. Sonny would go off a couple days and not come back till, after a couple days, go on a bender or go on whatever his heart's content fancied, or whatever he fancied. So the scuttlebutt was that he was involved with drug dealers and loan sharks in Vegas. And the impression that I get in terms of who, if he was murdered, which I believe he was, and if he was murdered, I believe that it was someone clearly in Vegas and more a part of the unorganized crime element in Vegas as opposed to organized crime. So I believe it was more local criminal figures and local criminals. You mentioned, what's his name? Earl Cage. He was, my understanding in regards to that raid was that Sonny Liston was warned by cops. That's the reported scuttlebutt about it, that he was warned about an upcoming raid. So if he was warned, he knew in advance there was going to be a raid.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in regards to cops because Sonny had a terrible reputation with cops.
He did.
He's essentially run out of
arrested practically if he went in different cities from Philadelphia to St. Louis, he would get run out by the police. Larry Merchant, who everybody may be familiar with from HBO's boxing channel that it was on. He was a writer for Philadelphia newspaper. When Sonny Liston beat Floyd Patterson, he stated that the confetti should be torn up arrest warrants for Sonny Liston. Yeah. So yeah, he's used to saying foul stuff, but yeah, man. But that was
well, he wasn't alone. The reality was, so getting into his kind of life as a boxer and as an individual, the reality when it comes to Liston was that he was no fan of the press, and the press was no fan of it.
Right.
I think was it Arthur Daly, I think of the New York Times, had noted, it's a very interesting quote. that I got. That his view of sorry, I was going to say Tyson, but although Mike Tyson has kind of identified himself with Sonny Liston and been identified with him as a comparison, and I believe he was in the Pariah documentary.
He was.
But what Arthur Daly of the New York Times noted was that his view of Liston was that he was arrogant, surly, mean, rude, and altogether frightening. And so when you look at not only the press view of Liston, but the general overall assessment of him by many sectors of the public, not all, but many sectors, that was how they saw Liston, who had a very intense, powerful stare, very mean looking at times, and was no fan of the press. Just going back to the beginning of his life, Liston was born in Arkansas, and he was born supposedly to a family, 24, I think it was 25 children, in a township in Arkansas, and came from reportedly a brutal family background, beaten constantly by his father,
right,
who was a sharecropper farmer and had to work
25 children.
Right. So he was brutalized as a child. Liston was. And I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a psychiatrist. But when you I think it was William Wordsworth, the poet, said that the child is the father of the man, or the boy is the father of the man. And that's the reality for anyone, that the childhood years and the adolescent years are the building blocks for your life. That's just the reality for anyone. Reality for you is reality for me, for all of us. And so your childhood and your adolescence don't determine your adulthood completely, but they help shape it. And in Liston's case, his childhood seemed to be a catalog of familial horror. I mean, being beat up by a parent constantly and consistently is a recipe for disaster. And in many respects of Liston's life, it just seemed to be the case. He seemed to be somebody who didn't come from a great deal of necessary love and care that are needed for the maturation and development of children. And once you come from that, it's very hard. I mean, he was, from what I understand, very wary of people, very suspicious. And it makes sense. It makes sense because you have a parent that doesn't take care of you, that's really abusing you ostensibly. I think reportedly what Liston was reported as saying was there weren't too many, didn't have shoes, didn't have too many clothes, and they were raised like heathens in his quote. And so Liston left Arkansas to go to St. Louis. I think his mother had by that time had migrated or gone up to St. Louis, Missouri. And he had gone up there and eventually got in touch with his mother and was with his mother. And, he never received much in the way of education. My understanding is that he could neither read nor write. He was largely illiterate. And the cliche phrase is that he fell into a life of crime or turned to crime. And that's essentially what he did because at a certain point, and I should note early on, this was noted before, but I should early on, he didn't have a birth certificate. I think there was one later on, but so there was no knowledge of when he was born. And so the scuttlebutt was, and the belief was that when he fought Ali in 1964, he may have been in his 40s. Although it was reported to be in his 30s at the time. That he may have been in his 40s, and I believe so. From my examination of photographs of Liston and looking at him, he struck me as somebody who looked to be a man in his 40s. Now, I can't say definitively. I don't think anyone can. But that was my take on it, that he was a much older man by the time he fought Muhammad Ali. who was known previously as Cassius Clay. And so he made it to St. Louis. He got into mischief, and ended up going to the Missouri State Penitentiary. I think the charge was armed robbery, and that's whether strangely or not so strange, where his career really began. One sports writer had mentioned that careers end normally when you go to prison. His began, and it's true. His basically began because a priest there, a guy named Alois Stevenson, I think he was running the gym at that prison, basically got Liston involved in boxing. And I don't want to say it saved his life, because it probably did, but it certainly changed his life, because he didn't have to resort to the kinds of, I guess, criminal activity that he was doing. He kind of had a career because he was boxing in prison. And so he managed to get paroled. I think his sentence was like a couple of years anyway, but he managed to get paroled, and he managed to come out and become boxer. I think he had won the Golden Gloves. Sonny did appear in a couple movies later on, especially the Monkees film Head. So no, he didn't win a Golden Globe, I don't think, but he did win the Golden Gloves, which is like amateur boxing championship. Unfortunately, with him, although he had found a career of sorts, he found a career in prison by becoming a boxer. He still got in trouble with the law, because he never had a sort of a genial, on the surface, he never had a genial relationship with cops. They harassed him, they bothered him, and a couple of instances he gave as good as he got. He had beat up one cop, took his gun, and he had beat up another. And that, I think, was, again, part of the seeds of the recipe for, I think, eventual destruction in his life. It made his life harder, because the word had gone out, no matter where he went, that he had harassed and beat up. You can't. One of the things is when you're dealing with law enforcement like that, they're never going to forget. And so that was a huge mistake on his part. I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. It was a huge mistake on his part, because that shadowed him wherever he went. He was in St. Louis. Cops harassed him there. He decided to go to Philadelphia, where he was for a few years, I believe. Essentially, he was there. That was his town when he won the heavyweight championship. In, I think it was 1962, if I'm not mistaken. But he was in Philadelphia, and then he decided to go to Denver. There's the infamous saying, he'd rather be a lamppost in Denver than the mayor of Philadelphia. And he was harassed in Denver, and he finally went to Vegas and seemed to thrive in Vegas. And he seemed to be an easier place for him to live. He just didn't have the issues and the problems he had in Vegas that he had in all of those cities. So, when you look at his life, though, that stands out. That's one of the things that stands out when you look at maybe a condition as to why he behaved the way he did and what his life was like. So as a boxer, he ended up having something like 50 wins and 4 losses. I think 39 of the wins were by knockout. And
Ron is saying he was allegedly afraid of needles and loved children. Yes, he had a big love of children. He was.
Yeah, kids flocked to him.
Yeah, he adopted actually. Yeah, well, Geraldine, actually, he and Geraldine adopted a child from Sweden. And also he helped raise Geraldine's daughter from another relationship that she had. And supposedly, Geraldine was aware that he was running around with women. But yeah, on the on the Cassius Clay thing, I'll just say this: I don't care how, as Arsenio Hall said in Coming to America, I don't care how old he was. He got his ass whooped when he fought Ali.
Well,
he was.
It's interesting you bring up Ali because I wound up watching more boxing footage than I intended when I did research for this interview. And like I said, he had 50 wins overall as a eventual champion. He won the championship in 1962 against Floyd Patterson. Now, the thing the people have to understand who don't follow boxing,
we said
was that Sonny was considered one of the toughest punchers in the boxing world.
Best
you
left
see the footage, his jab and his jabs and his eventual body blows and hits were considered devastating. And you could see it. You know, that jab would hit people. He would go and he'd start with those jabs. And the jabs were probably like, I would imagine, because he had huge hands, I would imagine it was like
a pole. Some of the fighters would say, for instance, I think Cleveland Williams said it was like a pole jumping up at you. Boom, like a constant, and his reach was just as big. His reach was about 86 or so, 80 inches.
Right.
And
I would say,
Ali had a huge wingspan as well, probably bigger.
Right. Now, I would say in looking at the footage, my assumption with listening, because I heard he was a devastating puncher, would be, I would assume it would be like if concrete, like a slab of marble or concrete smashing your face.
Yeah.
That's the way I attest it. You know, something hard, some hard, either mineral or metal coming at you and just smashing you. That's what it seemed like. My assessment of Liston as a boxer is that I call him a jackhammer, because it seemed like he was just, when you see a jackhammer who tears into the ground, it seemed like he was just tearing boxers apart before they eventually hit the pavement.
Yeah, he was blinding. I mean, one of the last fights he had with Wepner in the first round, right under his eye, he left Wepner with a big left hook that it just opened up blood, and Wepner was bleeding like a stuck pig throughout the fight. Also, they had the fight with Floyd. I mean, you look at his fights with Floyd Patterson. He knocked Floyd Patterson out in just the first round in both fights.
I believe in the when he won the championship in 1962, it was like 2 minutes and 6 seconds. So it took, I believe in 62 when he won the heavyweight championship of the world, Liston beat Patterson in 2 minutes and 6 seconds. Now, I mentioned his reputation, his dealings with cops. Now, the thing about Liston, I should also say, because it impacted him as a boxer, was the fact that he was involved. We mentioned that he was involved with the mob. He was a leg breaker with the mob. I think when he was dealing with someone called John Vitale, the mobster called Vitale, he was like a chauffeur, but he was really kind of a leg breaker. He was muscle.
Right.
Not just in the ring, but out of the ring. And so he was involved with the mob because the mob, mafia figures like Vitale and others gave him work. And they gave him, they took care of him in the way that, organizations like Tammany Hall in New York would take care of people and then say, okay, we gave you some food, we gave you a little bit to immigrants. It would say, okay, you're fresh off the boat, you're here you came from Ireland or what have you, we'll give you a coat, we'll give you some food, something to eat. Now, when it comes election time, you know who to vote for. Get in that booth and you vote our slate. Got it? Got it. You get you give something to get something, right? So the mob gave him some work, and he obviously got something, so he gave something, right? He's a leg breaker, and he's muscle. Now, the association, as I mentioned before, this was known at the time that he was involved and tied to mafia figures and mob, not just in terms of his contract, but just in his involvement. And what happened, as we well know, this is in the 60s, and what you have is the nascent, not just nascent, but the ongoing civil rights movement. One of the things that I found striking about Liston was that he didn't seem to have a support base from what I saw in the African American communities. Because every picture I see about Liston, he's surrounded by, the people that seemed to help him were all European Americans, that were all Caucasians. Like, I never see, other than George Foreman, and I put up a picture, I think on Facebook or something, in helping to promote this interview, because Foreman was his sparring partner at one point. Other people like George Foreman, I didn't see him around African Americans, and I didn't see a support system from him from African Americans. Certainly when it came to organizations and institutions in terms of the civil rights movement, they had rejected Liston. And I think it's one of the striking things. I mean, I looked at it, I'm going, he didn't seem to have a support base. I think that's striking to me. I mean, I've written for other ethnicities and other ethnic, for newspapers and publications at times when I was a freelancer, when I was first a freelancer in my career for other ethnic and racial newspapers. And, you know, celebrities and people there's a support system. You know, there's people within your community that help you and not necessarily guide you or help you, but there's a sense of support, ethnic support. I didn't see that with Liston. In fact, it seemed there was a sense of ethnic and rejection and complete kind of phobia of Liston. And there was a phobia, certainly with people involved in civil rights. In fact, Floyd Patterson, who fought him, was advised not to fight him.
Yeah.
Because he had met JFK, and JFK was like wary of him fighting Liston. And others, you know, Patterson was a very popular boxer. He was a very popular boxer. He was a boxer I liked personally. I liked Floyd Patterson a decent amount. But Patterson allowed, he stated in interviews, in the documentary we saw, but in others, he felt like he should get a chance at the title. And that's one of the things I respect about Patterson to me. He didn't have to fight Liston at all. But he chose to his own detriment, because he lost not only once but twice in the rematch. And
the downfall, that's when Floyd Patterson's career started to decline a little bit, right around the loss. Yeah.
But the difference was, from what I see, Patterson seemed to be a guy who he had a support system. You know, he had his family, and he was a popular guy. So he was kind of a guy who I don't know that he had the personal problems or issues that Liston had. He just seemed like more of a genial, nice guy, which is one of the reasons I liked him so much.
He was called the gentleman of boxing.
Right.
That was
so I liked Floyd Patterson a lot as a person, as a man. I liked him a lot. And so, so I always found it interesting that Patterson agreed to the match with Liston, who, sad to say, destroyed him basically in both fights. Now we get to the Ali and Liston, and some people may be wondering, since we're dealing with the demise of Liston, why are we discussing the Ali and Liston fights? Because if you deal with Sonny Liston, you have to talk about this. You can't ignore it. You can't ignore it. Because you have to deal with him as a boxer, and you have to deal with the most significant fights that he had outside of Floyd Patterson, which was the Ali, fight. It was the championship fight. Yeah. Now, as I mentioned before, Liston was probably, we don't know, but probably in his 40s when he fought Ali, who was much younger. I don't even think Ali was in his 20s yet. He was quite young.
Yeah, Ali was about 22.
Okay. Oh, so he was in his 20s. I'm trying to remember. Okay. Yeah. But he was quite young. And so, right. Ali, if Liston was a product of the mob and mob influence and control in boxing, Ali was complete opposite. He was initially part of a collective or combine, I believe, of business owners in Louisville, Kentucky, because that's where Ali was from, I think, Kentucky originally. Yeah. And so he was kind of the antithesis in many ways of Liston, not only in terms of the people that were supporting him and his background, but also in terms of his manner. People don't understand, if they find out anything about Liston or Ali, or even look at this, they have no idea just how polarizing Muhammad Ali was. Not just later polarizing with his stand against the Vietnam War, but how polarizing he was even in the fight that he had with, when at the time I believe was still known as Cassius Clay. How polarizing he was against Liston. Now, I read years ago a interview he had with Alex Haley with Playboy magazine, where he kind of laid out how he dealt with Sonny Liston to a certain extent. What he did was, Ali was known by some as blabbermouth, because he would go, he certainly did this in the weigh-in, which is normally a sedate
He was the Louisville Lip.
That's right.
Yeah.
I prefer blabbermouth myself, but
well, that's what Jackie Gleason, yeah, I think, called him blabbermouth. Just like do on the shows, yeah. And they were.
You have done your research.
I'm sorry.
You have done your research.
Well, I remember it because they were fighting in Miami, Florida for the heavyweight title. That's what the movie One Night in Miami is about.
Precisely. It's that there.
And they were actually supposed to be doing I guess it was during the press conferences or during training, and Jackie Gleason actually in this film I saw that they did on Ali back in the 90s visited, he was Cassius Clay at that time, telling him how Liston was going to close you a big blabbermouth or something like that. And
right.
And Ali, of course, shook up the world.
Yeah. Well, Ali was, I'm trying to remember the odds against him, but he was like 8-1 or some. He was not favored in the fight for obvious reasons. Just look what Liston had done to Floyd Patterson twice. And Ali comes along. Now, I mentioned Liston's jab, right? And he had like a devastating jab, and then his other body blows and his other subsequent blows to people. Jab to the head, jab to the upper part of the body, and lower parts at times. Now, when you look at the fight, which I did, between Liston and Ali, the first fight, what Ali was able to do, first of all, he was younger, far better shape, great shape. What he had done before the fight was what I think it was Sun Tzu in The Art of War would say, in the classic Chinese text, Art of War would say, to win a war, you have to win it psychologically. Right. What he did was psychologically try to beat Liston. And to do that, he was loud, hectoring, verbally bullying, and he acted in a manner to try to dislodge Liston psychologically and to get him off his game, to get him angry, because within the boxing world, from my understanding, is you're not supposed to, what was that? You're not supposed to fight angry because that distracts you. It distracts you from the technique you use to implement. You just want to go and start pounding people, but you can't do that. Boxing, after all, professional boxing is about technique. It's not simply about brawn or power, it's technique. And in the fight, the 1964 fight, go ahead.
It's the sweet science. It's about not just hitting, but also not getting it.
Right. That's very important. The couple of times that I've interviewed a boxers, and I've done it a couple of times as a reporter, the one thing I've heard a boxers say is the worst thing about boxing is getting hit. Getting hit. So if you look at this fight, you talk about the sweet science. So let's look at that sweet science. What Ali was able to do against Liston in that first fight in Miami was he was able to avoid the jab. Now, the jab is important because what Liston does with the jab is he sets up. He's taking his mammoth hands and going at the head or going at the upper part of the body to hit you and kind of probably knock you into next week. So you're distracted by the hardness of the blow. He then starts hitting you again and again and again. And that's probably why he was so successful as a boxer. He's giving you a quick hard hit, and hits you, and you're not able to sustain the blow because you're trying to react to the blow. And by that time, he's all over you. And what Ali was able to do was avoid the jabs. So what Liston's doing is, see, everybody talks about Ali's dancing around and moving around. Yeah, that's true. But he's doing that in tandem of going like this and going like this.
Right.
So there's a jab.
His weight, Ali is about an 86 reach, and he was able to, and I wanted to bring this up, he was able to keep Liston at bay and throw powerful combinations. He was fast, but during the fourth or fifth round, Ali, in between rounds, Ali goes back to his corner and actually tells Angelo Dundee to cut the gloves. They blinded me. It's a conspiracy because supposedly, I think what it is Liston put some type of substance on his glove and rubbed it in Ali's eyes to burn him. Cleveland Williams had complained about it. A couple other people have complained about it. And all he did was just hold. All he did during the fifth round was just hold Liston at bay and just
that was a smart move on his part because they were trying to wipe it away, and I think trainer was telling him just go out there.
Yeah, he was telling him run.
That was risky. It was risky, but I think obviously Ali. I didn't get into his training, but he must have been very well trained for this fight. Very well trained, because the way he handled Liston, especially during that period where he couldn't see, it was like a blur, was very risky. Like I said, the way that I characterize and analyze Liston's boxing style is hitting you with that hard, solid jab that hits you. So, you get knocked back, or you're trying to absorb the blow, and he keeps hitting you. And so Ali had absorbed some blows from him, but he was trying to keep close. He was trying to keep close in order and not separate himself. He kept all over Liston to buy time. And it seemed to work because eventually, I guess, whatever the liniment or whatever the substance that was in his eyes kind of went away, probably because the washing may have helped, or sweat from him may have helped. So, and he was able to help go to town. And he started trying to go to work on him. So that's why I say, when you look at the success of Ali in that first fight, he's moving. He's not only moving around, constantly moving. He's also he constantly goes. He's moving. And he's avoiding getting a lot of the blows to his body. He got some, but He's constantly trying for a certain amount of separation and getting close when he needed to, and getting, hugging up and getting close when he needed to. And the belief was that Ali had punched him to such an extent, Liston to such an extent, that either he hurt his shoulder, Liston hurt his shoulder, which is what he gave as his reason for eventually not going back out there, or that he had some cut or something in his face. In any event, I believe it was kind of fatigue. I believe Liston was tired. Again, you have to examine the fact. We don't know when he was born, but the possibility is he may have been in his 40s. And the scuttlebutt in the reporting is that he didn't prepare thoroughly for this fight. He didn't train thoroughly for this fight, which was a big mistake. If this is indeed true, it's a mistake. So he probably thought that his punching power alone would work against Ali. And it didn't. Again, what's important is what Ali does. He puts Liston in a position psychologically
that image
where he is. That's very important. Again, I cite Sun Tzu in The Art of War. You win the war psychologically before you fight.
Right.
So you dislodge him.
Yeah, well,
I think he was a special fighter. Sorry.
Yeah, he was, Derek. And even before that, what Ali would do, he would taunt his opponents before the fight. Like with Sonny Liston, he actually would call him the big ugly bear. He would go to his house in a bus screaming for him. He actually followed him, called him a sucker and a loser, taunting him while he was shooting craps in the Las Vegas casinos. And that actually pissed Sonny Liston off further because they say he loved to gamble. He loved shooting tables, so he shooting crap. So he said that was the last straw that made him want to fight Clay. But Floyd Patterson was the only title defense that he had prior to fighting Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay at that point. And Ali, of course, we know he prevailed in that fight. And then there was a second fight that was even more controversial because Liston gets knocked out in the first round. People think he's taking a dive. Jersey Joe Walcott was the referee.
Right.
And
that's the second fight.
This is from the second fight. That image.
But let me just finish up the first fight.
Sure.
So he sits and he decides he's not going back out there. I personally think that Liston was tired. He may have had an injured shoulder. He may have had other aspects. But the outrage was that he quit. And I think he quit. If he did quit, he quit because I think he was tired. It was at least, I think it was 7 rounds in the first fight. He quit because Ali, he didn't have an answer to Ali. Ali had quick jabs, which was very important when we talk about the second fight. But he had these quick jabs. His kind of dancing manner, if you could call it that, and his ability to bob and weave with his head and miss all the jabs and miss as many jabs as possible. That's very important because he wasn't dislodged. He wasn't stunned. He was able to, and his ability to quick jab Liston and to take punishment to him. And I just think that, it would have been interesting to see, would it have lasted a full 15 or so rounds? I think it was 15 at the time. Or would it have lasted a full 15? And I don't think Liston, people say, oh, Ali couldn't have done that for a full 15. I don't think Liston could have lasted the 15. I think that's why he quit. I think he was tired. And he knew that he was going to go down. And he just said, the hell with this. So that's my take on the first fight. And I have to assess it. Most people will wonder, well, we're talking about his death. Why are you now talking about it? Because I've already covered the death and you've covered it fairly well too. We have to get to this part to give you a kind of full rounded measure of Liston as a boxer. Because I think that's important in understanding. Not simply his death, but I think his life as well. So the second fight is in Lewiston, Maine. The second fight was odd. First of all, it's in Maine, a state not known for fights, not known for holding major prize fights. The heavyweight championship of the world was one of the major events in the sports world. More so than it is now. It was one of the major events because boxing was at one point the most talked about sport, or one of the most talked about sports. So you're in Lewiston, Maine, I think in what was an ice arena or something like that. And it was a really, really, I would call this a paranoid fight because I think I think Bert Sugar, who was a sports writer, was saying that they were searching everyone who came in. They were afraid that people would come in with weapons and so forth.
Yeah, there were people that they were worried about the Nation of Islam, but they were also worried about the mafia, people threatening supposedly the nation threatening Sonny Liston, and the mafia threatening Muhammad Ali. That was actually brought up in the TV series Godfather of Harlem. Not this fight, but just issues with the nation, and they talked about it before Ali got even started. But Ali was, but that fight was interesting, and very interesting in what happened. But go ahead and elaborate, Al.
Right. Now, the first fight, I don't believe the first fight was fixed. You talk about fixes and how fights are fixed and so forth. I don't believe the first fight was fixed. So people turn to the second and they say it was automatically fixed, that it had to be fixed. Shauna Salen, I believe in his book, and he's been interviewed about this, says, not Shauna Salen, guy called Paul Callender, who did a book about Sonny Liston, states in his book, stated in interviews, that the Nation of Islam, or the Muslims, had supposedly, this is his take in his book, that they had kidnapped Liston's wife and kids, and that they wanted him to throw the fight. So they were collateral in order to get Liston to throw the fight. Now, I'm not going to really, I see no proof of that either way. I don't really see any proof of that. It's possible, but I'm not going to speculate as to whether that's true or not. That's Calendar's view, assessment. I guess right off the bat, the question that should be asked is, was this fight fixed? And what are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts on it were, well, when I looked in real time, because they've looked and done analysis on the punch that was thrown. They call it the phantom punch. Actually, Ali called it the anchor punch. I don't think that the punch itself, I think the punch itself did hurt Liston when I looked at it. Now, a lot of people say, well, whether he was knocked out or anything like that for that long, could that have knocked him out? Because they didn't see the punch, but they actually timed it, and you could see. And maybe I could pull a video up of it right now, right quick, so we can actually look at it. Just give me 1 second. It's in slow motion here. Let's see. I'm going to stop share, and everybody can look at it right here.
Just say it. I got that pure uncut, straight from the border.
All right. I don't own the music, so this is in slow motion. That's Jersey Joe Walcott.
Who was a referee for the fight?
Jersey Joe Walcott was the former world champion. He was the oldest world champion at one point until that record was broken by George Foreman in 1994. But yeah.
Now, here's what's interesting when you just saw that, the so-called phantom punch. Here's what's interesting about what occurred. Now, you're looking at, of course, you're seeing the the dancing motion of Ali. Okay, here's slow motion of that. Now, here's what's interesting about it. He hits him clearly. And then what you look at Ali's next. See, what was interesting about that fight was that Ali was getting ready with another punch. He was looking to finish him. He was looking maybe not to finish him off, but clearly
throw another punch. Yeah,
he throw another punch, and he was. Ooh.
Well, he's doing what he's called is following through his shots. So usually when you throw a combo, when you're throwing one punch, you're throwing another. The fighters like that, they don't just throw one punch at a time. Yeah.
But he was warming him up. So he's throwing that jab. He's throwing that shot at him. He's throwing the jab. And he's doing it in order to soften him up for his other punch, which would probably be much harder. Here we are again.
Yeah.
Now notice the two.
Right on the jaw.
Yeah, he hits him, and then but look at the other one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look,
it's interesting.
It's interesting, but look, it's not that hard to knock someone out, especially if you get the right position, you hit the right spot on the jaw or on the temple.
Right.
I mean, Floyd Mayweather, Sugar Ray Robinson knocked somebody out.
That's what I'm saying. What you see, the thing people call a phantom punch, but you have to understand he did hit him somewhere in the vicinity of the neck and the head.
Right.
So Ali clearly hits him, as you can see in the footage there. But what's interesting to me is he's like any boxer, you want to throw a punch and then you want to have a much harder, either another much harder punch or series of punches. And what happened is he swings around, and after that, Ali he goes down, meaning Liston goes down, and Ali is screaming at him. He's telling him to get up. Ali looks infuriated, actually, because what Walcott has to do is go over there and force Ali out.
Corner. Yeah.
Right. Now, and then here's the point that people should keep in mind. People always talk about the punch, but what they never talk about was, yes, Liston went down, and then he tried to get back up and went down again. But here's an important part in regards to the second fight, the 1965 fight. Liston got back up, and they were and Ali was again trying to go to work on Liston, and then was stopped because by that time Walcott had gone over to the side, and supposedly they told him he's counted out, meaning Liston. So you got to stop the fight. And that's what Walcott did. That's part of the reason that this fight was so controversial.
That was
it wasn't just
Fleischer from the Ring magazine. Nat Fleischer was the one who was seated by McDonough, and he was waving his hands to Walcott, telling him that the fight was over. And Walcott rushed back to the fighters and stopped the fight because Ali and Liston started fighting again. Right.
That's the part that I want to stress. Everybody talks about the fact that Ali might have hit him or did hit him with the phantom punch and that Liston went down. But nobody talks about the fact that Liston came back up. And he was obviously sparring with Ali. This doesn't get talked about. I mean, maybe some people talk about it they might mention it, but again, Liston did not stay down. So could this have been a fixed fight? Yeah, it could have been. But my point is, if it were really a fixed fight, why didn't Liston just stay down? Why did he get back up?
Right.
I mean, normally if you fix a fight and you're supposed to take a dive, as the expression goes, you stay down. Liston did not stay down. He got up. And he started sparring a little, and then they ended the fight with them going at it, or engaged in pugilism, or engaged in sparring. Again, people don't mention this. Yes, I know it's possible that the fight could have been fixed, and more likely could have been fixed, but if it was odd to me. Why didn't Liston just stay down? That's all he needed to do.
Yeah.
He didn't need to get back up again. If this were clearly a fixed fight,
right.
Liston
moving around and not in a neutral corner, so that and Walcott is trying to get him to a neutral corner, so he's not paying attention to the timekeeper, which is what
That's
the referee
correct.
to do. And then on
But
top
my point about, but here's the point that I'm making. You're right about Walcott. First of all, Walcott seemed like a nice guy, but he wasn't a referee.
No, he wasn't.
It was a celebrity referee, and that was unfortunate for the fight. A real referee would not have allowed that to happen. And what was interesting to me was that Ali he was going over to Liston. I was screaming at him. He was screaming at him. It's fun, So when people say that this was a rigged fight, the only argument I have against that, and I can understand why they say it, and it is logical that people would think it is a rigged fight. But my point is this: if Liston really wanted to take a dive, and he was really trying to fix the fight, and it was in on the fix, why didn't he just keep his body down? Why wasn't he just on the mat? He got up. He got up and started engaging. Now, that doesn't say to me that this guy fought, that this guy was involved in a fix, or that he helped fix the fight. Because that's an odd thing to do if you're going to fix a fight. All he needed to do at that point, was just stay on the mat. That's it. That's all he needed to do. Even if it looked phony, even if it looked fake, even if it looked like he didn't really knock him out, all he needed to do was that. But he got back up. He got back up and he fell down as if he was punch drunk or drunk. And then he got back up again. I'm saying that I'm not an expert in rigged matches and in rigged boxing matches. But generally speaking, if you throw a fight, you're supposed to stay down. You don't get up and do more rounds. So I have to disagree that this was a rigged. It may have been a rigged fight, but I don't know that it was a fix.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was entirely a fix. I think it might have been rigged, in a sense, rigged in Ali's favor. But I don't know that this was, I don't automatically think this was fixed. I can understand why people do, and they say it was clear, but I point to Liston and I go, if this was a fixed fight, Liston didn't do his job right. Because he got up and then continued to fight with Ali. I don't know why this isn't pointed out. And again, I'm not a sports writer. I wasn't a professional sports writer. I'm a professional writer. I've been a journalist, but I don't write sports generally. Yeah. And I'm going,
I think it was fixed.
Why did Liston get back up? Now, again, the boxing writers may have a whole different take on this. They're experts in boxing. I'm not. I'm a layman. But I'm trying to use logic and common sense, and I'm going, either Liston wasn't in on the fix, or he may have decided, look, I'm just going to fight this. In any event, if it was a fix, Liston didn't do his job. And there was that belief in regards to Chuck Wepner that he was supposed to, take a dive in that fight too, and he didn't. He beat Wepner instead. So I would argue if he was a fix, Liston didn't do his job. Now, I don't know how people here will take that. The boxing fans here will take that, or other boxing fans, because I'm going against the orthodoxy of people like who have written about this, who've written about Liston, and people who've written about the fight. A number of them. I believe that this was a fixed fight. Liston did not do his job. He did not stay down when he should have stayed down. And this may have happened with Chuck Wepner too. Go ahead.
Well, I think with Chuck Wepner, that one probably would have been, from what everyone says, that one was the one that they were more pissed off about than anything. But I thought Liston got caught on this one. But no, surely, I mean, listen, they did not like Muhammad Ali at this point, and I think he was not even favored. From what I'm reading here, he wasn't even favored in the sequel, in the rematch here. against Liston, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that location being in Maine, they said they needed, the promoters were trying to find one quickly to rescue their closed circuit television commitment around the country. And the governor of Maine stepped forward, John Reed, and gave them that location, and that's how that happened. But yeah, that was strange. Not California, not even in New Orleans, which would have been perfect, but Lewiston, Maine. I don't know.
Well, New Orleans is a major party town.
Major party
Tourist
town.
attraction, party town.
Smash the lights up. Yeah, it's also at that time too. It's also home to Carlos Marcello,
right?
Who the mafia don. He was the godfather of New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of him. Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy actually. Just on another note, Bobby Kennedy and the feds. They actually, I don't want to say. Well, I guess you could say kidnapped, but they kidnapped him, brought him all the way to South America. Because Bobby Kennedy just wanted him out of the country, and he finally gets back to the country, and was pissed off. Obviously, what happened. So, but that's another story.
Yeah. So, Justin, to kind of conclude, and a couple of conclusions here for me, as I mentioned earlier, in regards to the death of Sonny Liston. I think that Sonny was murdered more than likely. If he wasn't, it was accidental. But he was likely murdered. And if he was murdered, it was by local criminal elements in Vegas. I don't really believe it was organized crime. It's possible it might have been, but I don't really believe it was organized crime. I think when you consider the raid on Earl Cage's place, you have to take that into consideration. You have to keep in mind that Liston was probably at that point, he was doing some, public appearances, and he would, sign autographs and that sort of thing. But he was at that point, meaning 70, 71, pretty much that he was likely possibly involved with criminal elements, because he had been involved with the mob before. He was probably involved with local criminal elements. Because I think a big question is whether since he died with drugs in his system, was he a drug user? Now, one of the cops, like I said, Caputo, I believe his name was, who was there on the scene, he stated that he was it was well known he was a part-time user, meaning Sonny Liston. I think he did use some drugs. The question is, what kind of drugs? Was he into heroin? Was he into cocaine? He had marijuana there. I can believe that he did marijuana possibly. But in regards to his death, I'll repeat again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe organized crime was behind it. I believe it was murder, Sonny Liston. I don't believe organized crime was behind it. I was local criminal elements. And I believe his wife knew he was going to die. I believe Geraldine knew. I think that's one of the reasons why she left Vegas and went on vacation, and why she also came back. And you look at her statements and you look at her account of the death, it raises suspicion. I think she was pretty much, because let's be honest. I mean, Sonny lived a kind of, to certain, he clearly lived a bit of a wild life in those latter years. And I think his wife, I believe his wife knew well that he was going to die. I look at the account and I look at the things she said. I said, that doesn't strike me as somebody who's completely surprised and horrified and not suspicious. It strikes me that she had a certain finality to it, a certain kind of matter-of-factness. So I think his wife knew he was going to die. And I think he was killed if he was murdered, by local criminal elements in Vegas.
Yeah.
The second aspect of when you look at Liston that I mentioned here is I don't believe that the second fight, the first fight where Muhammad Ali won the title against Liston was 64. In 1965, I don't believe that it was entirely fixed. And if it was a fix, Liston did not do his job. Who knows? That might have had some ramifications down the line. But I am now suspicious because I've been hearing that the second fight was a fix. People were certainly screaming that when the fight was over. And some people believed that at the time. But at this point, I'm kind of going against the tide and going, I don't believe that Liston certainly did his job. If it was a fix, he didn't do his job right. He tried, but he certainly didn't do his job right. And so I don't entirely think that Liston took a dive. And if there was a fix, Liston didn't do his part. And so those are the two major aspects that I would cite in regards to this case of Sonny Liston.
Right. Well, what I would say, my opinion on it in Sonny Liston, I certainly think that his death was foul play. I do think I think it could have been all of the above in my circumstances, in some way, shape, or form. That they were principals, as what we call in Louisiana, accessories before the fact in common law states, and there were accessories after the fact to this as well. The Red Rodney, the Red Rodney is a guy I think that's interesting. He said that Sonny's days were numbered according to his own son's statements. I certainly think the Earl Gage character is someone that's interesting. Either way, it was somebody that Sonny Liston knew that he got into that house that day.
Right.
As far as his wife Geraldine and not calling the police immediately because of a reaction like that, you either get a neighbor to come over and call the police instantly because you don't know if you don't know if anybody else is in the house. When you see something like that, and that obviously terrorizes you. And, her statements just didn't make sense for me either, that it took that long for the police to even get out there, or for her rather to call the police. The other aspect of it, as far as Liston as a boxer, he is one of the most devastating punchers in history. I think he goes down. He's listed in Ring Magazine as number 10, as one of the greatest, 10th greatest heavyweights of all time. Certainly, I don't think that Bert Sugar doesn't have him in his top 10. Bert Sugar, I know, was well respected as a sports writer, but I think that he was he was a bully, and he got beat by somebody who could stand up to the bully in Muhammad Ali, and Ali knew how to box. There are people who know how to fight. There are people who know how to slug, but there are boxers who know how to box, know the sweet science, and that was the greatest of all time in Muhammad Ali. And I think that I don't think necessarily the fight was rigged. I think just neither fights were rigged. I think that, although I think the mafia, of course, rigs fights, I don't deny that, and money was also involved. But if anything, I think Liston was at this point, he was probably just tired and frustrated with boxing and people. They say he was so lonely at one point, like he would just he saw Jerry Eisenberg, who is a famed sports writer, and just on the spur of the moment wanted to have breakfast with him. And he said that's when I realized how lonely the guy was. So Sonny Liston was a tragic figure, somebody that was celebrated, or not celebrated. Sadly, he entered this world without a birth date, and he left this world even without a death date. So he went out that way and came in that way, and he went out that way, which was unfortunate. And I feel sorry for his family if they haven't had any closure in this matter. But it's good to have programs to come on and talk about stuff like this so that others can investigate it and look into it and make the decisions for themselves, because who knows, there is no statute of limitations on a homicide. So I'll tell everybody where they can find that or get in touch with you.
Okay, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter at CriticINC. That's at CriticINC on Twitter, which is at Critic Incorporated. Again, that's at Critic INC on Twitter. I'm on Facebook under my name, Albert Lennier, of course. I'm on, let me see. Where else can they get me?
Wife didn't call the cops immediately. That's correct. Derek is just tuning in. He's a frequent, he's one of my mods and the guest on the channel. He comes on this platform, always shows me love. Yeah, his body was in decomposition. His wife didn't call the police immediately. She called an attorney, their attorney, and a doctor, and also contacted neighbors. But police didn't arrive till a few hours later. They didn't call the police until a few hours later, which was very suspicious. So something was going on in that house. Probably they didn't want people to see, or the authorities to see. So that might be something to think of.
At Critic Inc. That's on Twitter. At Critic INC, I should say, on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook under my name, Albert Lennier, and I'm on Instagram at the Al Show, and let me see what else. That's it. I mean, it's pretty much how you can reach me: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I guess.
Right, and before we get out, Al, I do want to say, because it had been a while since I saw you, happy belated birthday.
Oh, that's kind of you. Thank you very much.
Happy belated.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate it.
That's no problem. Thank you for coming in and tuning in, and we hope to have you come back on some more random topic Sundays. We probably will do another celebrity death. I don't know which one I might look into. Somebody mentioned Marilyn Monroe. She's interesting.
Jeez. Oh, jeez. I'll spend a week researching that one. That would take me a week to research at least.
Yeah,
you don't get me
started. You could do or maybe it might be good to do one on John Belushi. I mean, you could do Belushi. Certainly was I've seen the biography versions of the events and the final 24. Very interesting. Dick Gregory even mentioned something about John Belushi and tying it with the Kennedy assassination. That was something I thought was very interesting, a long time ago, but old brother Dick. But but I'll be in touch with Al, and we can all talk about what our next topic may be. But y'all please follow Albert Lennier on Facebook, as well as follow him on Twitter at Critic Inc. Of course, how you can help contribute to this channel on this platform is by donating to the Cash App, Gavin Richard Esquire, or Google Pay and PayPal at gavin.grich1@gmail.com. It's always good if you can support me to continue shows like this, because it makes great conversation, and also I think it's important for us to research and read and know our history. Al, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I especially enjoyed, I'm not a boxing fan or aficionado, but I enjoyed talking about the fights and about Liston as a boxer. That was very enjoyable. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. This has been another edition of Gavin Richard Presents here on channel G.O.A.T 2786 and self-entitled channel Gavin Richard, and on Facebook if you're watching, and on Periscope Gavin Rich 2786. Thank you to Derek Bailey, to John Renthorpe, Rosalind. I see Angie 94565 and Valerie Denise Jones. Shout out to her. You've been on her platform with Judge Joe Brown and others. Cheryl Macy, and of course, Brother Ron stopped by to give his 2 cents on Muhammad Ali and throw in some history. James Earl Mones. If everybody that's tuned in, I want to thank y'all again for tuning in, and I will see you all on Tuesday. I don't know what the topic will be, but it'll be a good one. So thank y'all for tuning in. I'll holla. Peace.